Avi, what are some of the goals of the Northern Manhattan CLT? What are you guys looking to accomplish?
We want to get tenants to own their own property and to put it into the trust. That's what it comes down to most of all. We want to keep people in their homes and keep the landlords off their back.
Excited today to have Avi Garelick. He is the treasurer for the Northern Manhattan Community Land Trust. Now, if you're like us, you're probably asking yourself, like, what is a community land trust? So we're here and we're going to break it down for you. Welcome to Uptown Voices. From Harlem to the Heights to the northern tip of Inwood, we're here to celebrate our people and together seek solutions for the difficult issues we're all confronting as neighbors. Regardless of what hood you represent, we share the same goal: creating the best community we can, somewhere to enjoy, where we can build our lives and raise our children. We want to thank 181 Cabrini, located on the corner of 181st Street and Cabrini Boulevard, for its generous support for this podcast. It's your neighborhood bistro just steps away from the North Walk of the GWB. Stay tuned for a discount code that you can mention to your bartender or server the next time you visit the restaurant. We also need financial contributions from listeners like you to produce, improve, and expand our content. To contribute, please scan the QR code on the screen or visit www.livingamericana.com. That's living without a G. Avi, first of all, tell me a little bit about yourself and about what your work is here in Northern Manhattan.
Sure. Well, first of all, you guys, thank you so much for having me on. It's a huge honor to be on Uptown Voices. I'm really glad you're doing this podcast. As for me, I'm a longtime Washington Heights resident. I mean, it depends how you define it, but I got here in 2010. And I've been involved in community work of various kinds in the Jewish community, doing education and community building. Then lately, in the past decade or so, politics and community work. I was drawn to the work of the Northern Manhattan Not for Sale Coalition, starting in about 2015, 2016. Because I had kind of a personal feeling that I wanted to fight back against gentrification. I was doing all this stuff with this growing Jewish community in the Washington Heights area, and I was aware that, that sort of thing has an impact. As sort of there's only so much space in the neighborhood. There can be kind of feelings of tension between us and the other folks uptown. So, that made me upset. I wanted to sort of look at things in a different way and be like a positive contributor to building bridges and community change. So I got involved there. And the main project of Northern Manhattan Not for Sale, for folks who don't know, is we were fighting this predatory rezoning of Inwood for a few years. It was a knockdown, drag-out fight with the established interests in the city. It was a very eye-opening process for me. And one of the things that happened with us is we realized, we're part of this resistance to these predatory upzoning. We, like so many people in the city, saw what happened in Williamsburg, Greenpoint, whatever, other neighborhoods where they've got a big rezoning during the Bloomberg era. That was what made it possible to have all of this like faceless upscale development while people were not getting their basic needs met. And so we were afraid of that happening in Inwood. But as we continued the fight, we realized that we needed a message beyond no thank you. We don't want any change. Right.
In Williamsburg, it was very easy to just tell people to move out and knock down the building and put something back up. But uptown, it's different. And it sounds like what the Community Land Trust is ready to do and needs to do is make sure that tenants are organized. Is that right?
Yeah. Tenant organizing is the central part of our vision, and we need so much more.
Avi, I got a question for you because I don't even know what a land trust is really. Like Octavio gave me a bunch of homework. I'm studying. Let's start from there. What is a community land trust?
Yeah. Okay. So a community land trust, very simply, is a legal sort of institution that makes it possible for the community to own its own land. What you do with a community land trust is basically you have a nonprofit organization with representative membership, right? So you create a kind of democracy for the organization, so it's not just controlled by donors or whatever. And then that organization owns the land beneath all different kinds of types of development, whether it's housing, outdoor space, whatever you got. So the CLT, as we call them, provides the community control and the security, right? Because in every deed, we write everything that's required to make it for the benefit of the community. If it's housing, it'll have standards for how affordable. If it's outdoor space, we'll have standards for access, et cetera, et cetera. And those, you can't break that. But then also, you can have the building itself owned by the tenants. So then the tenants themselves, who are closest to the issues in their building and know each other, they can govern the basic issues in their building. But then they can look to the CLT to protect them from bigger issues and to help with issues that are really like scale problems. So like you're not gonna have to worry about like paying for a big capital improvement like a boiler or a roof all by yourself. If you're part of a larger CLT, you can rely on the collectivity. You know what I mean?
I guess one of the problems in Upper Manhattan is that a lot of these buildings are run by landlords that aren't really doing their part to upkeep their buildings, right?
Back in 2019, tenants in New York City had this huge victory. They passed a bunch of new legislation that made it much harder for landlords to push you out if you're in a rent-stabilized building. And Washington Heights and Inwood is the most densely rent-stabilized area in New York because we have so many, 6-story, 5-story, larger buildings. And that was a huge success for us. It made it much, much harder to be displaced. But the flip side is that landlords responded basically by saying, well, if we can't raise your rents, if we can't double the rents, et cetera, we're just not going to invest in the building anymore. So people are experiencing all across uptown worse and worse conditions. You see more fires. You see all kinds of problems now, like with sanitation and rodents. Obviously, the rats are out of control. Landlords all have their part to play in that because they just have an eye on the bank. They're looking at the bottom line. And if they can't raise the rents, they're going to try to keep their profit margins constant by decreasing costs. That's simple, rational interest for the landlord. So we need a new model of ownership that can actually provide safe housing that's cheap and that people can control themselves in their own interest.
I have so many questions. When was this land trust, the Northern Manhattan CLT, when was it formed?
We started having meetings in 2017. It was like a working group of the Northern Manhattan Not for Sale Coalition. Then after the loss on the rezoning, we basically took a hiatus. The nonprofit dates back to like 2021, and we've really been organizing earnestly starting in the beginning of 24. We've had intense gentrifying pressures for like the entire 21st century, and currently, as we've discussed, landlords are divesting from their own properties in a way that, it's not like we're not really quite at the bad old days yet. But like you saw what happened, if you know New York history in the 70s and 80s, landlords just wholesale would abandon their property, sometimes set it on fire on the way out to collect insurance money, which actually is kind of the origin of the first generation of this kind of work. Community development corporations and some of the earliest community land trusts in the city of somewhere around that time, because, tenants looked around and they said, well, we should take matters into our own hands. Our landlords are completely absentee. We don't want to leave. Right, nos quedamos, like they said in the Bronx. We're going to stay and make it work. So that's a matter of filling in where the landlords are abandoning the scene. Today, things are a little different, and it's harder to get property into community hands because landlords don't want to abandon the scene, but they also don't want to do their jobs. But yeah, now you see, so there's an established community land trust on the Lower East Side called Cooper Square, which, if folks want to, if you're in the neighborhood, you go check it out. Just walk along East 4th, East 3rd. And you can see it's a beautiful street. It's got great retail, well-maintained housing. That's all because of that CLT. Now, in this new generation, you've got East Harlem. They're off to a good start. East New York is buying properties. So it's an exciting time to be part of almost a movement of small organizations across the city.
And Avi, what are some of the goals of the Northern Manhattan CLT? What are you guys looking to accomplish?
Well, a couple of things. most important, we want to get tenants to own their own property and to put it into the trust. That's what it comes down to most of all. Some CLTs are going to be more focused on new development because there are good opportunities for new development. What we're looking at is we have a really solid building stock, some deterioration across the board, but good buildings that if, you have cooperative management focused on maintaining them well, they'll survive for a long time. So we want to keep people in their homes, and keep the landlords off their back.
Could you explain a little bit why now might be a good time for people to start to get organized?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, and excuse me if this comes off as too wonky, but the overall picture, as I mentioned, landlords are decreasing costs and trying to, maintain their profit margins as they can no longer raise rent so high. The other big issue for landlords, if they bought before 2019, is a lot of them are what's called over-leveraged. Over-leveraged means they took out big loans from banks or whatever with the idea in mind that they would start to double and triple the rent roll on their building. So they said to the banks, look, we have a bunch of poor tenants, they think they deserve to live in Washington Heights, but we know better, so we're going to harass them until they get out of here. And then we're going to double the rent on that unit. We're going to do that over and over again so that by the time, the mortgage is due, 2030, 2035, you'll be getting these big payments from us. And the bank said, that sounds good. It's been working so far in New York for the past 20 years. Here's a big loan. Now they're struggling to make the payments on these big loans that they should never have taken out. That's just a structural issue, which is that you'll see like landlords trying to unload their buildings. Now, the tenant movement wants to be there to catch them when they fall. I mean, the buildings, they want to get in there and buy if the landlords are selling. So that's why there's this legislation which has been discussed at the state level and the city level, TOPA and COPA. So TOPA is the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. COPA is the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act. And it's very simple. It's a first right of refusal when the landlord wants to sell. So the landlord puts the property on the market. TOPA would require them to inform the tenants and to give them the first chance to buy at whatever is the market rate. So obviously that law by itself is not a magic spell because we still need to get together the money to buy those buildings. I mean, whatever it is, it's going to be pretty expensive. It's New York City. So we want to get the laws across and we want to get funding from state, city. I'm not going to mention federal. We know we can't talk about federal, but yeah.
It's good to organize now because these over-leveraged landlords, basically, they owe the banks a lot of money because they thought they were going to be able to, raise the rent 3-4 times what the rent was, and then they are not able to. So then they're just ignoring the building, but they still owe all this money. So they might want to sell the building. But these laws would say, okay, you who have ignored your tenants and are now trying to sell the building, you need to give the tenants the first opportunity to buy the building. And so tenants need to get organized so they can prove, hey, we're organized enough to take care of the building. And community land trusts need to be involved because they got to be able to say, oh, and we're able to tap into these monies so that we can help the tenants to purchase their buildings, which I would imagine that after ignoring these buildings and letting them become so run down, they've probably decreased in value.
Well, yeah, what we need, like you said so well, is for tenants to get in the game, to start talking to their neighbors about their issues and start mobilizing to fix them. Because number one, that's good no matter what. I mean, you got to get to know your neighbors and work together to get your basic needs met. It's always more effective when you work together as a team, and not just in dealing with your landlord, but also dealing with whatever's coming. I mean, we talk about all kinds of stuff that a few years ago we had COVID and people needed to do mutual aid to help each other get groceries and so on without getting sick. Today you've got ICE all up in people's business, and and you need community networks just to let people know they're coming and all of that. So tenant organizing is like, it's good for your health.
It's good for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah, I remember someone saying community is the answer, right? So that's definitely true. But what are some of the tactics that the landlords are doing to push people out? Because in my building, for example, I'm one of the few playing market value, but I know they warehouse a lot of apartments. The apartment right next to mine, there's no one in there, hasn't been there forever. And there's a bunch of apartments like that. Can you tell us about warehousing and some of the other tactics they're using?
Yeah. We don't know how many units across the city are being warehoused like that.
You
There's
don't know?
actually, we don't know, and there's a huge range of estimates depending on who you ask.
Wow.
Um, the city tries to do an estimate, the state has a separate estimate, the landlord lobby puts out their estimate, and they're just basically there's no reliable way to know on a large scale how many there are. But anecdotally, there are a ton. And it's sad, I mean, because first of all, you're getting deprived of neighbors, right? Instead of neighbors, you have nothing. Best case
Right.
scenario. Problems can fester in the building, structurally. If people aren't there living there to keep track of it, you get, God forbid, rodents, birds inside the building using it as a home, right? So it's a big, and not to mention that it restricts available housing at a time where there's a huge housing crisis. People can't find apartments. So that's a disaster. Landlords are trying to use that as a political chip, which is why you can't believe their numbers either. They want to say, we can't renovate these apartments and still make ends meet with the rents that we're required to charge. So they're leaving them empty, even though in the short term it costs them money, they could be making rent, because they are trying to pressure the government to let them raise the rents again as high as they could before. So that's part of, so basically there's a lot of buildings around the city where once people move out, they just don't fill them up again. And it just makes it harder to organize. That's one thing. Yeah.
And besides warehousing, what other tactics are they doing? Because I'll give you an example. My mom has a rent stabilized apartment. She's been there since '79, and a few years back, they said she hadn't got paid her rent in like 6 years, which is nonsense. My mom is old school. She got the money order, and 1 month out of the few years they were questioning, my dad had just didn't have access to the money order. He didn't have a copy. So they made us still pay that 1 month, right? Which is nonsense. But what other tactics are they doing, like to try to push us out?
Well, that's awful. And it sounds to me typical, because for them it seems like the best case scenario. I mean, even if they can't get you on everything, they'll get you on one little thing, and they'll make $600, $1,200, whatever. And yeah, and they could push you out. I mean, they're also super difficult about succession rights. So if
Right.
folks know about that, right? If your mom or your uncle uh, or your grandparents have a rent stabilized apartment, you as their family member should be able to take it over if they want to move, or they're passed on, God forbid. So they make that. I mean, it is like legal as long as you establish residency while they still live there. Landlords will be a huge pain about that and try to keep that from happening. That's, I mean, even if they don't have a good plan to get that unit out of rent stabilization, they still just hate having multiple generations of a family live in a place because it gives you more power to have stability. And that, as a class,
Right.
they want tenants to be discombobulated and on the run, and they don't want us to be able to form stable communities.
I think Led, you and I have talked about the drug issue in Upper Manhattan and the fact that the only places in the United States where there's safe injection sites is up here. And is that partly, how does that affect the housing stock and the neighborhood and the prices for buildings, and how does that impact the people that are already living in those
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I would say off the bat, first of all, I fully support On Point in Washington Heights, and I'm a huge fan of everything they're doing. I think it's life-saving work, and I know people on staff there, and I know people who have used their services. And it's an incredible thing. Like I said, life saving and life changing for a lot of people. That said, I mean, I think we're on the back end of, I mean, a really serious, life threatening crisis, the opium crisis. I don't know off the top of my head, but it's one of the top causes of death nationwide. It has been for a while. So that's a threat, whether you're housed or unhoused. People vulnerable to that drug addiction. I mean, it's an issue that it can be a curveball issue for tenant organizing. Before COVID, I was in a building on Wadsworth, that had an active tenant association, and we faced a problem with a guy actually whose grandmother had a lease in the building, and we had he was basically causing trouble. He would let his friends in, and they would be using out in the hallway and on the stairs because his grandmother didn't want any of that happening in the apartment. And it was disruptive, it was messy, and families with kids were like freaked out. Um, so we came together. We had a very raucous meeting on the subject, which where the management was actually present. Someone invited building management to come, and so management heard about it, and they said, well, you can help us by asking us to evict the grandmother. Right. If you guys all sign on to this letter, then we can sue her, and that'll help us get her out. And some people thought that was a fine idea since she couldn't control her grandson. But a lot of people said, well, there's no way we're gonna, she's a good woman. I mean, she's she's having a little bit of family trouble, and she's getting old, but we don't want to see her out on the street. That was boisterous. People went back and forth because a lot of people just saw that as the most obvious solution. But there was a lot of resistance, and eventually we basically ended up calling his uncles, and they brought him to like Queens or something to defuse the situation. So that's the sort of thing that coming together and building community, and looking for ways to keep everybody housed and safe and feeling good in their homes. That's something that only tenant organizing can do.
Yeah. No.
And I just want to say one thing, Avi. Like, respectfully, I don't know if I agree with you about On Point, right? I mean, I think they have their place, right? But there's only 2 safe injection sites in the whole country, and they're both in Uptown, right? Washington Heights and El Barrio. But that's a I think a much larger topic that we need to tackle further. But I just wanted if you could just like bear with me. I almost feel like that it feels like it's a Trojan horse for gentrification, right? It feels like it's helping to push us out, right? Because, and it also, I think that it's helping to make people sell drugs, right? Because heroin, people when buy heroin, they're not going to go far. They're going to do it where they cop it. So you're actually forcing these young people to sell drugs to these people. So I don't know if maybe I'm wrong, right? I'm open-minded about it, but I don't know if I share the same kind of viewpoint about them as you do.
I think maybe you could do an episode on the subject. You can bring someone from On Point on, and you could do a debate or a roundtable or something. The opiate crisis and the fentanyl crisis is stuff that's has global impact, and is destroying Mexico. Not to mention neighborhoods in the U.S. And it's a little bit beyond what we can settle here.
For sure. No, but I just want to say maybe there was something I'm missing, right? That you knew that I was missing about it, because it feels like ever since On Point came uptown's just gotten worse, right? I grew up here. I lived here through the crack era, right? I was a kid during the crack era, and I see things here that I've never seen before, right? And again, it just feels in certain ways that they've become a magnet for just drawing drug addicts up here, right? But anyway, like I said, this is another topic. I want to ask you, and it's kind of what you were talking about, the Northern Manhattan not for sale. Like, when you look at Inwood now, being that you fought the good fight, right? But now what you were fighting against has happened to some degree, right? What are your feelings on when you go to Inwood and you see what it has become? What do you think about that?
Look, I mean, Inwood is staying strong as well as it can. And as we discussed, in the year after we lost the rezoning fight, we won the big statewide fight for the tenant laws. So that changed the landscape. We were very afraid of the rezoning creating pressures on the building values in the rest of Inwood and exacerbating already really intense displacement pressures. Now, those pressures are not as intense as we expected. Instead, again, we've got the problem of deterioration and disinvestment, maybe we should call it. So that's different. And, as far as the effects of the upzoning, I mean, it's really too early to tell. If you take the subway to 207th Street on the 1 line right now and just look, you stand on a platform and look across towards in the direction of the Bronx. So those new buildings, they just are finishing. If they just finish those up, they're going to be leasing those out over the next year or so. So those are big. I mean, those are big. What kind of changes to the neighborhood those will affect, we don't know yet. and that's not even getting into what, the rest of the neighborhood.
Right, because those are actually, there's still plans for many more buildings to be going up in that previously industrial area, right? I mean, they're
Indeed.
not done. They're not done with the building. So it's still too early to tell that how Inwood is going to be impacted by those large buildings, because they're coming. I know for sure if they do get filled up, it's going to be a lot harder to find a seat at 207th Street than it was when I lived there 10 years ago.
Or parking, right? Because parking is gonna be even worse. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's some
Yeah,
good stuff
and we don't
that's
know
happening.
what kind of cultural changes to expect either.
You want to tell them a little about donations and how they could help the show?
Absolutely, we can't do this without contributions from our viewers. You're going to see a QR code of the screen here, which you can scan, and that's going to take you to a contribution site where you can make a contribution towards Uptown Voices. It's going to be helpful for us to be able to elevate our production. We have dreams and aspirations of doing live shows. We have dreams and aspirations of being on location at our various cultural institutions, and we can't do that without contributions from viewers and listeners like you. And we also can't do that without our sponsors. And this pilot season, this first episode of our pilot season, we are lucky to have a great sponsor, 181 Cabrini. It's our neighborhood bistro. Both Led and I are just steps away from 181 Cabrini, and we love it. 181 Cabrini is located right there on that corner of 181 and Cabrini, just steps away.
181 and Cabrini.
Just steps away from the bridge. So yeah, I love it. Led, you and I were there the other night.
Yeah, and we also met there for the first time. You and I, the first time we met, we had like lunch there, and it's my local bar now. Like since you and I both live like right around. It's my local bar. I spend a lot of times there. James Lee, the owner, is just an incredible restaurateur. Right, I think he's a great guy. He's super funny, but like the food is on point. And it's a place also where I watch the Knicks games, right? So please hit up 181 Cabrini. It is really one of my favorite spots. But yeah. 181 Cabrini. The sangria is amazing. Everything in there. Oh, and you have to try the coconut bread pudding. They got coconut, they got chocolate, and now they got banana, but the coconut, outstanding. So like I said, it's the attention to detail for me. It's a great neighborhood joint. Thank you to James and 181 Cabrini for sponsoring this episode. And, if you want to sponsor, holla at my boy. You know what I mean? Let's make it happen. You know what I mean?
I just want to say one thing. We're going to have a redemption code at the end of this episode, which you can bring to 181 Cabrini for a special treat.
But yeah, without further ado, though, let's get to it. Let's do it.
So can I go back a little bit? We don't know how many of these apartments are being warehoused. Is somebody collecting those statistics? Can tenants reach out to your organization or some other organization and say, hey, if you're collecting numbers, I live at this address and I can tell you that this apartment is empty and this one's empty and this one's empty, so that you can continue building a list?
Yo, we'll take it. I mean, that's something that's been on the back burner for me for a long time. I thought one of the things we really need is a community-driven data collection process. And if anybody who's listening wants to take the lead on that, I mean, I think it would be really cool to just go up and down your block. Just go up and down to all the buildings in your block. Right? You knock on every door. It's a lot of, fine. It's just one block. So it's a lot of doors, but it's just one block. A couple hundred. Split it up with some other folks. You just want to know, is there someone living here? Then you ask also, okay, you're living here. What about the other, I knocked on the door across the hall. Didn't get an answer there. Do you know if there's someone living there? Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, so-and-so, they just work nights. Try again, in the morning or whatever. Or, yeah, they live there. Or that one, I don't know. I haven't seen anyone coming in and out. Or I know for sure, that one's been vacant since 2022. I think you could make a list. If we get momentum on that, I think it would be a really cool project. And it could, we could prove something cool about neighborhood community data collection. I mean, great.
You know what I find interesting, Avi? Like you're doing like good work, right, and important work, but it's hard work, right? It's not easy work, right? It's work that you have to actually convince people that the work needs to be done, right? Like, so how do you stay motivated? What keeps you going, right?
I mean, this is going to be kind of sappy, I guess, but honestly, I just am doing the work with my friends. I mean, Paul, Paloma, and Chris were the core of the CLT project, and we've been working together now for many, many years, and we built deep connections. So I feel accountable to them, and have a good time whenever we're working on stuff together. When we have meetings, we cook, we get together. It feels good, and I think it's really important. It's really important to make it happen that way, to build community and friendships, and to cook for each other, and to help each other out with kids or whatever it is. And that's also what I would say, to anyone who feels afraid of tenant organizing, or feels like it'll be a slog or too much work, or there's too much risk, or you feel like you can live with whatever situation you're in. At minimum, just the minimum tenant association is you just get to know each other a little bit more. There's so many ways that we're being drawn into our own little cocoons in 21st century society. We got our little, our demonic screens, and we can just stay inside our bedrooms and ignore the world around us. And it's such a shame, because it's destroying society. Like, we need to stick together. So it could just be just as much as knocking on the next door and saying, I've been having this leak. Have you been having something like that? Also, what's your name? Where you come from, and, do you want some dinner? And if it doesn't go, you don't need to be having twice a month meetings and going to housing court and, tying yourself to your landlord's office door in order to be in a tenant association. I mean, just start small and be friendly.
And if for those who are inspired by the work that you're doing, because, I reached out to you, Avi, because I really think that the idea of the Northern Manhattan Community Land Trust is important work. And I would personally also like to participate somehow. So I'm just going to put it out there. Like, I would love to work with you on some project, some way and somehow. This is one way that I can work with you to get the word out about what you're doing with me and Led on our Uptown Voices podcast. How can other people become involved with you? I mean, yeah, I think what you said is really good, that you don't have to be doing like monthly meetings with your neighbors. It's just a question of like just knocking on your next door neighbor's door and introducing yourself is a great start. But what if somebody's more inspired and wants to work with you or wants to volunteer with you? How can they do it? What are the kinds of people that you're looking for? Like, what roles are you trying to fill and things like that?
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. So we're a small and mighty organization. And right now, the vast majority of our effort is going into working with this one couple of buildings on 170th Street. We're working with them intensively, supporting them and trying to get their buildings out from under their landlord. And, so we're a small group, so that's our main project. In the meanwhile, there's so many other buildings that are in such similar situations. So, if people want to get involved, get to know the community land trust model, we can train you into it, and you can start knocking on doors and help us expand the project. You can also help us run events. And of course, we take cash donations. Good too. Helps us with our operations. And really, any of your skills are probably going to be helpful. So we have a little contact form on our website, northernmanhattanclt.org, and you can email us, team@northernmanhattanclt.org. We get to know you. We'll try to find a project. It's like, we have a new logo as of this year, thanks to Brenda Gonzalez, who's a designer. She said, let me help you out. We'll get a popping logo. That's her skill set. That's great. Right. It's like somebody, if you want to like cook for a tenant meeting, you love to cook. You got a good black beans and rice recipe. Let's get you in there. So, it's like the sky's the limit. We need to be bringing our skills to community work. So get in touch with us, and we'll get you plugged in.
That's awesome. And I want to ask you about the two buildings you spoke about at once. The landlord was arrested, right? Like, does that give you... Right? I think he was arrested, right?
He literally went to Rikers Island, folks.
Wow.
Yeah.
He was in C-74.
I don't know what's the plan there.
So, but how does that affect what you're doing in those buildings? Is that good or bad, or does it push the agenda forward, or does it somehow make it go backwards?
Surprisingly, it is not as helpful as you might think. I mean, it raises the profile of the buildings, which is good up to a point. People are interested. You get your elected officials coming out to the press conference, which is good. But, we live in America, and private property is private property. There's not really anything. The tenants want to own their own building. The only way to get that to happen is for him to sell it. So we're still working through that thicket. The city might help. The city can sue him, but it's a very challenging process. In the meanwhile, there are court orders for him to fix the violations. There's very slow progress on all that stuff. Media attention moves on. You get somebody else at the top of the worst landlord list. So it's a boost to see him get arrested, but it's like him spending time in Rikers Island doesn't fix the mold in your bathroom.
Right. It might hinder it actually, right? Like
it might actually hinder. I mean, obviously there's a management company and stuff, and there's a superintendent, that is getting his paycheck from the management company. So it's not, it doesn't have to come to a halt while the principal is doing time. But, that's just the system that we live in. It's like, well, we have jails, we got to use those, but we don't. There's no magic spell to make these buildings that he's neglected for so long suddenly lovely places to live where the tenants can feel good about it. That's a slog.
Yeah, and then we haven't even touched on what's the issue with commercial properties, and there's so many commercial properties or blocks or plots of land that are in total disrepair. I mean, for God's sake, Coogan's Bar, which was like a mainstay of the neighborhood and was somewhere where everybody would gather, lost its lease after COVID, and there's nobody in there still. That was how long ago?
2 years ago.
2021, I think. Yeah, I think it was 2021.
So is there like a land trust idea that could be applied to things like that? Like there's a few places in the neighborhood where there were people that were gonna decide we were gonna build something, and then they never did, or they half built it, and now there's like, I think it's on like off Broadway, there's like a building that's really just like a skeleton of a building, and it's been that way for what, like 10 years now. There's a corner of 183rd and Overlook that was going to be this massive building, and it's just a empty lot that's, you can't even look into it. There's the corner of 181st and Broadway that used to be the Coliseum Theater, and now it's just weeds. So like, is there anything that community level to address those issues? Because I mean, we do have many issues like in our homes, but then we also have these issues, all these places could have been apartment buildings for folks to live in.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, there's a lot there, and it all comes down to just the basic incentive structure of the private land ownership. I mean, I'm sort of beating the drum on this one, and maybe I sound like a crazy radical, but like, listen, you own a lot. You own this lot on 181st and Broadway. Let's say you're the family that's lucky enough to have this lot. You don't have any debt on the property, right? Are you paying property taxes? It's freaking vacant, okay? You're fine there. You can basically, if you build an apartment building now, but if you had waited another 7 years for the neighborhood to gentrify, okay, you could have built an apartment building that would like double your total net operating income over the next 2 decades. Hello, you're not going to build it now. Timing is so important for development. You want to get the maximum, because once you build it, it's there forever. I mean, it's there for the rest of your life. So landlords want to be very judicious about when they do their big project. Now, for us, what does that look like? It looks like overgrown, empty lots that are breeding grounds for rats that we can't use for anything. So the community is suffering while private landlords bide their time. Talking about Coogan's, I mean, we got to take on Columbia Presbyterian if if we're taking that issue seriously. I mean, that right there, the landlord there, I think. So they've got some other plans. I mean, they don't want a neighborhood hotspot. They want, I don't know what they want. I mean, housing for their doctors or something. So, I don't think the Community Land Trust is gonna be able to take down Columbia Pres necessarily, but I do think, as we grow and gain momentum, the goal is to be able to take on properties like that and to be able to work on putting them to community use, right? And it needs to be a citywide movement, a national movement, and especially a movement of the neighborhood to turn the tide towards community ownership of land that makes it possible to override some of these antisocial impacts of private landlordism. That's all we can that's all we can hope for.
So it seems like, Avi, like the government needs to step in and push these landlords, right? It seems like they have incentives to not do anything. So what can government do to make things better?
Well, the government could put more pressure on owners of vacant properties or underutilized properties. I mean, there is an idea that's been thrown around for a long time called the land value tax that could contribute to a community ownership future. Basically, what you do with the land value tax is instead of just taxing the improvements on the land, which is the basic property tax that we have, you tax the value itself. This comes from the ideas of a very interesting thinker from earlier in American history, named Henry George. And he looked around and he said, well, so much of the value of owning a private piece of property actually comes from the improvements that are kind of generated by society. It's especially true in an urban context. I mean, on a basic level, you have sewage, you have pavements, you have street lighting, electricity, internet. That's all in there because of public activity. And then you've also got, the intangibles. You've got culture, you've got local economies, all the stuff that makes properties in a place like New York City valuable to have. So the government could tax that value, right? Since we created it in the first place, we could tax that value. That would be good income for the government. Also would incentivize landlords to use it or lose it.
Right.
Now, it's not always good. Landlords using it is not always good for us, but it could get, it could get them moving. And if they don't want to build, maybe they'll sell it off to a community land trust that can make something happen with it.
I wish we could just solve this, just snap our fingers and make it happen. It's so frustrating to be in such a great neighborhood with so many great people and be confronted with so many of these, frankly, I mean, I want to say they're complicated, but also at the same time, they're also pretty simple issues. There's land that needs to be used, right? So, I mean, yeah, I wish we could just, snap our fingers. But, what I do really like about what you're doing, Avi, and also what you do, Led, on a daily basis, and what I'm trying to get involved with, is that you do build community. And I've heard you both say how important community is. And Upper Manhattan, Inwood, Washington Heights, and Harlem, those are three iconic communities where the people really do stick together. They are true neighborhoods where people do, get to know their neighbors for the most part. And I hope that's going to be the case going forward. Led, do you have any? We're not going to solve this issue, and we're not going to understand it fully either in this, hour that we have together. And I hope that this is not going to be the last time, Avi, that we get to speak with you. I hope to have you on more frequently as we get the podcast going, because it's a complicated issue. So to listeners who might still be sort of like foggy about what the heck we're talking about, I understand. I do want to get this issue on our table, though. And I think that this format, this place, especially being that we're local, right, it gives us the time and space to talk about it. Led, I'm sorry if I droned on, but go ahead.
No, you're good. I just want to say, Avi, thank you for the work you do, right? Hearing you talk, the way you talk, and the passion that comes through, and I'm really thankful for that, right? It's inspiring, right? Sometimes, you forget why you do things, and I want to thank you for that. And any final words, like Octavio said, this is not the last time we talk. I think you were so smart, so brilliant, so focused, so passionate. So we definitely could do updates. But for right now, anything you want to leave the community with?
Yeah, thank you, Octavio. I'm really impressed that you're putting this podcast together, and it's what we need uptown, just to build consciousness and to help people learn about what's going on in this neighborhood and around the city. I just got to go back to my old refrain, man. Knock on the doors knock on your neighbor's doors. Just say, hey, what's up? We have this problem. Do you have that problem? Get to talking. That's what you have to do. And email us at team@northernmanhattanclt.com.
Yeah, get out of your comfort zone, people. Come on, get out there, knock on your neighbors, make friends. That's why we live in New York City, right?
That's what it's all about.
Exactly. Avi, thank you so much, brother. I really appreciate it, and thank you for fighting a good fight, brother.
Thank you, guys. Be good.
Thanks for joining us in this episode of Uptown Voices, brought to you by 181 Cabrini, your neighborhood bistro just steps away from the North Walk of the George Washington Bridge. Use the code Uptown Voices Season 1 for your discount. And to stay up to date on the latest in Uptown, you can follow Uptown Collective on Instagram, Facebook, and X. If you're watching Uptown Voices on YouTube, don't forget to smash the subscribe button and to give us a like. Until next time, this has been Uptown Voices.